this quite uncharacteristic behavior does show that something is definitely up, that he feels that he needs to stop motorcade and be photographed and filmed hugging with people and taking selfies with teenagers, sort of to prove to himself and everyone else that he still has public support.
The CI director, Bill Burns, he said that Ukraine's Kursk incursion, it's dented Putin's war narrative and it's also prompted questions with Russian elites. What do you make of this? But also, what does he mean when he refers to questions among Russian elites?
Yeah, I think Bill Burns made a very good point when he differentiated between public opinion and opinion of the elites. Again, as far as public opinion goes, I would say it's very hard to get a fair idea out of it, because we've been seeing sweeping repressions starting from opposition leaders to random Russians. So imagine you getting a phone call from a pollster asking, do you approve of Vladimir Putin? And this is the question where 85% of people currently say yes. So obviously, a lot of, you would imagine that a lot of those people are caught in a moment when they're thinking about the consequences of saying no. So putting that on one side and moving on to the elites, I would say yes. The question here is like how the incursion was perceived. All of those months, as the war has been going on, Putin has been trying to build the legitimacy of the invasion, saying that we are fighting Ukraine and we were the first to attack Ukraine because Ukraine was allegedly was plotting to attack Russia, which again was not in the works. So for those close to Putin, there was a major wake up call in a sense that the Russian army was supposed to be invincible. Okay, it did not seize Kiev in 3 days as previously thought, but it has been fighting off the Russian army, and the fact that a foreign army was able to cross into Russia and hold those positions, it's absolutely unprecedented for the post-war era, and understandably it makes people in the elites concerned that first it's going to be Kursk, what's going to be happening next. um, Again, if I can go back to the public opinion, again, as I've said, it's something that's very hard to estimate at this point because we don't have accurate polling. We do have polling, but it's the question of how, yeah, whether you believe it or not. There was one thing that I would pay attention to, was there was a separate poll from the one asking, do you approve of Vladimir Putin? There was another question that Russians were asked. They were asked, is there a politician who you trust? It was sort of an open-ended question. So so people were offered to give their own answers. And for that question, we had the lowest number of people saying that they trust Vladimir Putin since last summer, since the failed coup led by Yevgeny Prigozhin. So yes, in short, it has dented Putin's popularity. Is this causing massive popular concern and massive disarray within the Kremlin as outside the Kremlin? Yeah, no, I wouldn't say so.
And in terms of Russian elites as well, how would you say their reputation is now with Putin, especially following the Kursk incursion?
Well, a lot of those people are dependent on Putin for their survival. They're dependent on him for their material needs. This is the generation of people who were used to vacation on Côte d'Azur, who would go to Paris and buy expensive handbags for their wives. They're not allowed to do that. A lot of them are now under European sanctions. So the idea was that if they're not welcome in the West anymore, Putin is supposed to hold his part of the bargain and provide for their security back home, because of, for those people, like if they, a lot of them feel that there is no way out. And with the Kursk incursion, there's this idea of the physical safety that one day it's Kursk, next day you yourself is traveling to some region and find a drone or find Ukrainian soldiers there. So it just it dents into Putin's image of everything is under control. Yes, we're fighting this war, but it's going on in their favor. And again, I think it's important to say that when the decision to invade Ukraine was taken, we know for sure that it was a one man's idea, and it was an idea that was consulted with and approved with a very close circle. We're talking about 4 or 5 people max. And I myself, being in Moscow at the time, I remember Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov being asked at a news conference whether he can offer his assurances that Russia was not going to invade Ukraine, and he said definitely no, definitely yes, that that is not going to happen. And I'm absolutely sure that he was not involved in those discussions. And actually, from various sources, we know that he was not important enough to be briefed on them. So all of those people, they felt sort of in the lurch that this was the decision taken without their knowledge, without their approval. So they sort of stuck with Putin, and basically the war is going for Russia in general. The more vulnerable they feel because their position is based entirely on Vladimir Putin and his grip on power.
And going back to Putin's public image, it's interesting how you mentioned how when people have to vote on what they think of Putin, there is that pressure for them to be supportive and show publicly their support of Putin. However, as you've written about recently, Putin also has a dependence on the public, and especially in terms of how he has to maintain a good public image with them. And for example, you looked at how Putin tries to seek validation by doing recent meetings with the public. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think it's quite extraordinary, and it is definitely becoming a pattern. Putin is not the public politician in the classical form of the word. His predecessor, Boris Yeltsin, was a political enemy, as many of the readers might remember. He would gather political rallies, he would go out and talk to people. Putin is not like that. He's not a career politician. He's a former KGB officer. He's a bureaucrat. Early on, we saw him doing events like that, and we saw how much unease he was at those moments. Is definitely not something that he enjoyed. Definitely, he felt like he had to do it. Gradually, he stopped doing those events, sort of meeting people in random surroundings. It was just not his thing. Then. When COVID-19 happened, he self-isolated, and there was this stringent health protocol put in place. But what we've been seeing in the past year, again, is quite extraordinary, and is becoming a pattern. When Putin finds himself in moments of weaknesses, he spontaneously goes on a random trip to a random region and sort of like goes out to the crowd and does a walkabout, which is very much unlike him. We saw that first after the failed coup led by Russian warlord Yevgeny Prigozhin last summer. Again, this was still in the middle of certain COVID restrictions for Vladimir Putin, so there was a lot of questions asked about, how come he's not scared of catching it anymore. Then we saw it this winter in. January, I believe, after the horrific terrorist attack on a concert hall in Moscow. He also went out and met a spontaneous crowd of people. And the last one that I talked about in my story is his trip to the North Caucasus, when he stopped his motorcades in the middle of the city of Vladikavkaz, and I think went out for a sort of meet and greet with people who were milling on a square. And I think I specifically counted that he spent about 50 seconds with them before retreating. Again, that happened just a couple of days after the invasion of Kursk. After which he made very generic remarks. He still doesn't describe it as an incursion or an invasion, which it is. He calls it a situation, so he very much avoids any alarming language or anything that the situation requires. So on the one hand, we can see him trying to play it down, trying to reduce the messages to saying that everything under control, but this quite uncharacteristic behavior does show that something is definitely up, that he feels that he needs to stop motorcade and be photographed and filmed hugging with people and taking selfies with teenagers, sort of to prove to himself and everyone else that he still has public support.
Is this an indication that he feels threatened?
I would say it's an indication that he feels vulnerable. Again, when you say he feels threatened, he would say like, is there any competition? Is there anyone around? Obviously, all of the Russian opposition is now in exile or dead. His main nemesis, Alexei Navalny, was died or if I may say, was killed in jail. He died under murky circumstances in Russian jail in February. So, in that sense, there is no immediate threat to his rule. But whereas, while there's no threat to his, even immediate threat to his rule, he feels himself vulnerable, as we can see, and obviously feels that he needs to sort of reaffirm his popularity, just to produce those pictures and videos for papers and television channels, which are under state control as it is. They're not going to be offering any criticism for him, but it's definitely a point of weakness. Yeah, it's quite an extraordinary thing.
So Russia still maintains that Navalny wasn't killed in prison, he died in prison. Now let's turn to Putin's innermost circle. You wrote about recently how there's been a recent reshuffling of top government roles, so that now he has blood ties, relatives now instated in these roles. Could you talk about this and why you think this is happening?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing quite a lot of reshuffling at the Ministry of Defense. The long-time defense minister was fired a couple of months ago. Um, at least two of his deputies are facing charges and were jailed in recent months. Um, and again, everything is happening in such a short period of time that it does look like a purge of such, and definitely it looks like Putin purging the defense ministry and punishing them for failing to defend Kursk, or failing in extending Russia's gains in Ukraine as such. And as an element of that, as you've mentioned, this the gradual elevation of people who are close to him, who could be his blood relatives or who could be someone like his bodyguards, people who he knows intimately and they would know intimately him too, and he would and because of that he would feel that he could trust them more than even close allies that he has worked with for several years.
Do you think this gives us any indications about his plans for the future? Do we see this as a potential plan to extend his leadership role?
Well, I wouldn't say so. But again, Putin has managed to get the Russian constitution rewritten in 2020 that allows him to run again for another 6-year term after securing a new term earlier this year. Um, we have no indication that he's planning to step down anytime soon. He's in his early 70s. From what we can see, he doesn't see himself doing anything else. There was an interesting moment, I think, last week when he was at some conference and they were PhD students or some sort of younger people in the audience who sort of were more spontaneous and asking him like more of beat questions. And one of them asked how what he would do on a day when he's not a president, how what he would imagine himself being on a president, like how would he spend the day when he's not a president. And I think it was quite telling, and I think he was quite honest in saying that he does not picture himself spending a day as not a president. It was sort of this very telling and honest moment that it's like there's no picture in his mind about what it's like not to be a president in this country. So again, about appointing these relatives of his niece Anna Tsivilova to the post of a deputy defense minister. I think it's about placing relatives in strategic positions, possibly for sort of priming them for even higher roles. But it's not about succession yet. I don't think we're at this point. He's in a great physical shape, as far as we can see, and he definitely intends to stay in power while he can.
And how do you think that's being interpreted by his closest inner circle?
Well, I mean, so far his inner circle has banked their security, prosperity, and survival on him. And to them, in a way, this offers more stability than an unknown successor, who you haven't worked with for a long time. Are you going to trust him or her to keep things as they are? So in that sense, the Russian elite feels more secure than with Putin, than with anyone else, because this is the person, they've been around for a very long time. Yes, he's erratic. Yes, he's taken decisions, a lot of them do not agree with, like the invasion of Ukraine. They would not have done it on their own. But I think it's more of a better the devil you know situation here.